Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being patient, for starting a little late as you know. So I just wanted to make a couple of announcements regarding just some housekeeping stuff. So first of all, I want to thank people. There have been some really nice donations that have come in for manuscripts. So, but we continue, you know, it's a drop in the ocean, but we're so grateful because every little bit helps. And so the professor is, you know, looking online to find out what the best candidates are, and we're also talking about kind of finding sort of the top 5 that we can try to save. As some people have suggested that, you know, they would like to know what specifically we would save if we had the money, so we're going to try and create a way to communicate that. And then hopefully once we get those in our hands, we'll bring them and show people. I have to apologize because I know people have been emailing me and things like that. We actually traveled this past week, which was really nice. The professor did a talk at Harvard Law at lunchtime and also at Wellesley College. And so when I get a moment, I'm going to post those up online so people can catch up and see. He also did a podcast after the Harvard Law talk and then did like an informal Q&A. So we have some good stuff happening. And then I just want to kind of add a piece. Last time during my introduction, I talked about prayer, and I was sharing the story about how when I was a young convert, that my friend who actually took my Shahada loaded on the prayers that were required. So I understood that I had to pray for, you know, some ungodly number of prayers, but like for Dhuhr, that I said, you know, it was like 4 rakahs for Sunnah before and 4 rakahs for Dhuhr, and then another 4 rakahs for Sunnah, and then another 2 after that. And I didn't correct actually because the professor told me, even though that is true, what that person told me I had to do, the actual Sunnah is 4 rakahs for Dhuhr, and then either 2 and 2 as Sunnah or 4 after. So it's not like, you know, 100 prayers Sunnah. So in case, just to clarify that. And also I wanted to say, you know, if you're just new to joining us, I usually take this time in the beginning to share some stories and talk in the introduction about kind of my experiences. And some people have written and said, you know, told me, it would be really nice if you could talk about your conversion experience. And I actually wanted to just say, I actually have talked about my conversion experience in the early halaqas here. So you can definitely go back to YouTube and search up the Usuli Institute. And I'm always at the beginning, but from the beginning I did kind of share different things over time. So, you know, there's, for whatever it's worth, it's just, you know, another story to share. But, so for today, I'm wearing black because in honor or in mourning of what's been going on in the last 2 weeks. I just want to ask, how many people have been following the Kavanaugh hearings? Okay, because it's been such a painful time for so many people, and I felt that it was really important to talk about it, especially because it affects, you know, women, but it affects all of us as Americans here, and it's definitely been very historic in every sense. We know this morning he was now officially confirmed as our next Supreme Court justice. The votes finally came in. And it's been a really difficult time for Americans. It's been a difficult time for women, for survivors of sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual violation. And it's, you know, it's hard to, I mean, I felt it viscerally, I felt it emotionally. It's like, you know, there's just this heaviness that I think all of us share. And as the Atlantic magazine put it, the guardrails have failed. So, you know, there is no more checks and balances, the Supreme Court has lost its legitimacy, and it's clear that white patriarchy has really come into full force. So, you know, the old men and old women who are, you know, the 51 senators that took it upon themselves to make a decision that, you know, their partisan needs were more important than the needs of this country, is really a turning point for us. And so as an American, I mean, I feel very, you know, eviscerated, but I recognize that I have to deal with this as a Muslim and as a woman and as a convert. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about what that means. So my story of sharing today, I always pick a story to talk about. And this week, it was really nice. We were at the law school at Usuli Law, and I actually posted a video so people can kind of see this. But there was a walkout, a national walkout that was planned to protest Kavanaugh. So this was before the vote, obviously. So, and we were there on a day when the professor was teaching class, and it happened to coincide with when he was teaching class. So it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the faculty and students were told that people might walk out of their classes and congregate in the courtyard. And so we actually, the professor suspended his class and went with the students as they were, wearing black and gathering and sharing their stories. And it was like it was an opportunity where there was one megaphone and people could come up and just say what they wanted to say and grieve together. It was really heartbreaking because every single person that came up started with, "I'm a survivor, I'm a survivor, I'm a survivor," and then would go on and share their story about what happened to them. And some of them, this was sometimes the first time that they actually said it out loud in public. There was, memorable among them was, a woman who said, she told her family, and it wasn't a big deal. To them, it wasn't that they didn't believe her, it's actually that they didn't think it was a big deal. And then she actually broke down in front of the audience. And then there was another woman who said that she came to law school because she had dreams of arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court. And now, knowing that Kavanaugh is going to be on that Supreme Court, she just that dream is gone. She couldn't see herself arguing anything in front of that man or that court. And now she just felt like a victim and didn't quite know what to do with herself. There were also 2 men that came up. One man was, 6 feet tall. He said that he was in a foreign country and he was violated. He went to the police station to report it, and they laughed at him. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. He didn't have his shoes. He had nowhere to go, and he was there on his own. And another man had never said it before, and this was in front of their classmates. So he was saying, "I've never told my family. I've never told my friends," and and he was angry because. There was an email that had come out from the law school basically telling people to set aside their anger. And he was just expressing anger and saying, you have a right to express your anger and not shut up. And really was encouraging people to do that. The thing that was shocking is if you haven't heard the statistic, it's 1 in 3, some people say 1 in 2 women are victims of some form of sexual violation, either have been or will be in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 men. And we know that these crimes largely do not go unreported. So to me, that says to me, actually, the majority of women have been victims of some form of sexual violence or violation. So that's the majority. So let's take a moment to think about that. Think about the women in your lives, the ones that you love, the most vulnerable, whether it's your daughter, your mother, your sister, your cousin, your nieces, your best friend. Of all those women by that statistic, half of them will have already or will at some point in their life be victims of sexual violation. This is unbelievable and unacceptable. And, part of what we need to do is call it out. People are really uncomfortable coming forward, obviously. And what happened with, Christina Blasey Ford, very bravely sharing her story. I was riveted to that testimony. I watched every moment of it. And then I watched every moment of that horrific, premeditated, arrogant, belligerent, there are just no words for the testimony that Kavanaugh gave. And, you just can't help but think, what is the message that we're sending to our daughters and our women? That if this happens to you, you basically should just shut up and accept it. And I can't accept that. That is simply wrong. So, as a woman, even the speed with which everything was rammed through, whether it's, the vote has to happen now, the, investigation, which we know is a bit of a sham, and, it was on a limited timeline, and then we had to vote, all of that, as someone wrote, feels like the culture of rape. And it absolutely does. And at another level, it feels like a gender war, because this is really targeted towards women. So what do we do? I mean, as a convert, let me back up. So listening to these stories, I was very proud that the professor got up and spoke, because honestly, he was probably the only faculty member standing out there. He was definitely the only faculty member who suspended his class. He was the only faculty member that spoke, and it meant a lot to the people that were out there. And, and I videotaped it, and you can't really quite hear it, but he basically came out and said, I have seen these cases, because he was the chair of the student conduct committee at UCLA for a decade, and he used to adjudicate these cases of rape and students raping other students, and this would happen every single weekend. Every single party, every single social function, there would be women who were assaulted and raped. So he felt, very strongly that he needed to come out and say, I believe you, and I support you. And, and that meant so much. I wish that more people had done that. So what I wanted to share is, as a Muslim convert, I think especially, I chose this faith, and I sacrificed to be part of this faith. And part of what pulled me to this religion was not the message that you hear at the mosque, not about, how Islam is easy, black and white. It's about haram and halal, and you should be watching where your scarf is, and if your hair falls out of your scarf, or, whatever it is. I came because I believed in the Islam of love and mercy and compassion and being with the oppressed and justice. This is what we have to remember as Muslims. And we know that God is with the poor, the ill, the oppressed. And if he's there, I know God is also with those who are sexually assaulted. And we have to be at the forefront of, talking about these issues. They're not talked about at the mosque, obviously. This is not something that people want to touch. And there's no shame in it. I want to tell people, victims of sexual assault, there's no shame, because it wasn't your fault. And I actually, I struggled with this next part, because I am a survivor, too. And I didn't know whether I wanted to say that or not, but I decided that, I really need to say it, because this is the time when we need to come together. When the highest levels of justice have been literally decimated, when we can't look to the Supreme Court, and we have to look to one another to really make justice come alive. We have to stand up, and we have to be counted. We have to say, this is the reality of this problem. And we as Muslims can be part of the solution. So, for me, when my story happened when I was a child, so I was much younger than Christina Blasey Ford. She was 15. So I think that, these experiences, they murdered my soul. And they murder the souls of every woman who has to be in a situation where they are forced to experience something that will traumatically change their lives for the rest of their lives. But what I want to say is that, I'm so grateful. I think part of that experience from the time of being a child and seeing so much ugliness and not really quite knowing how to process it, part of what it makes you feel is a desire for beauty and a desire for meaning. Because you've seen such ugliness, you're looking for, what is the solution? What is the answer? Isn't there something more? And I do believe that was instrumental in opening my heart towards finding Islam, but the Islam of beauty and the Islam of love. And I, now it's been decades, of course. I became a Muslim at 25, as I've said before, and I actually did not become aware of the sexual violation until several years after that. So I was an adult and trying to deal with that. And I was very fortunate that, Dr. Abou El Fadl, we were married, and he believed me. And he loved me enough to support me and do everything possible to help me heal. So number one, instrumental to that was the Islam of love. And instrumental to that healing was recognizing that God wants you to be a beautiful, divine person. And I want to tell people, you can heal from this experience. There is, most people don't even know this, but there is an Usuli method that people can heal from. And, I can say that it's very similar to the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program. So it's not anything that's unfamiliar to people. It has a lot to do with being very open and honest and confronting things and trusting in God and trusting in beauty and all of that. So, I want to tell people, survivors, that there is healing. When I was watching these people talk at the law school, I desperately wanted to say something, but there was no place there for me to talk about faith or Islam or God. So I wanted to say it here. And, there were women who were saying, I feel like a victim and I don't know what to do. So I want to say that, for us as Muslims, we know that so much of that healing, it's a long, long process. It's kind of like when they say the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think the arc of healing is long, and it bends towards beauty, and it bends towards, this beautiful idea of what Islam can be. And I would not, now I can say, decades later, I would not change any of what happened because it brought me to where I am today, and I'm so grateful that, I, was able to overcome a lot of what comes with that experience. And it's truly because of, God and faith, and you have to be patient, you have to do a lot of hard work, you have to get help, you have to have a support system. There are a lot of ways, and you should not feel ashamed. Muslims have to start dealing with this issue. They have to start, making it something that we can talk about and tackle. They don't like to talk about addiction. They don't like to talk about abuse. They don't like to talk about, whatever the social problems are that we have. And how can we not be Muslims, and our whole faith is about uplifting those that are that are suffering. And, I just out of curiosity, I was thinking to myself, I'm really curious what, if mosques this week at their khutbahs were talking about the Kavanaugh issue, because this is a huge issue. And disappointingly, the local mosque, and I don't, really want to name it, but, I played their khutbah, waiting and hoping to hear the word Kavanaugh, and nothing. It was just another typical young, fiery guy telling Muslims, like chewing them out about how to be nice to one another. Which is just like, okay, we have to be relevant, we have to be real, we have to stand up for truth, we have to stand up for justice. We witnessed before our eyes the ugliness of this whole process. So ugly, if I make the analogy of, this to sexual assault. It is so ugly that the only thing we have left is to look for beauty. How do we make that beauty happen? How do we become active in that? And we have to start by demanding more. I hope that, I know a lot of young people watch these halaqas, and I'm so angry from seeing what the khutbah talked about, that I am like, you know what, mosque leaders, if you can't handle these issues, then step aside, get out of the way. This is not, mosques are not where you can enjoy the power of being able to lecture people for your own ego. Mosques we have to reclaim these spaces as spaces where people in need and people who are suffering and people who need help can go and feel like they can get help. Whether you have problems with abuse or harassment or addiction or, whatever problem it is that is affecting our youth as part of this country, we need to demand that these mosques, and take them back. They need to be relevant, and they need to help our people, and they need to start being an example for humanity, not just for Muslims. So if you people, you old people, sorry, closed-minded, maybe young people are closed-minded too. If you can't handle the reality of our world, get out of the way, because there are people here who can and are ready, and we need it. Because if we don't, the country is on a path to go downhill, and we've got to fight like hell to reclaim that. But as Muslims, we can be a solution for humanity. Everyone's searching for beauty. Everyone's searching for meaning. We have it in our tradition. We just don't know it. So again, and I would say, the mosques should be encouraging everyone to come out and vote and get these people out of office. I didn't hear a word vote I didn't hear a word Kavanaugh. I didn't hear a word women, sexual abuse, anything like that. So it's time. This is how we heal and how we uplift our nation. That's why we're Muslim. And if you can't do that, if you were not appalled by what you saw, if you didn't feel the injustice of this as a Muslim, then I would say you need to check why you're Muslim. Because I've sacrificed to stay in this religion. And if you're not willing to sacrifice some skin for making this world a better place, then fine, leave. We don't need you. We need people who are ready to fight and who are ready to uphold the virtues, the active virtues of our faith, and be examples for humanity, not just for other Muslims, and not people who are just feeding their egos. So, thank you. Can I say one more thing? Sorry. I forgot to say this too. We hear that that Muslim women who are married somehow have been told, some women have been told that that means that their husband owns their bodies and has a right to their bodies. And I'm telling you that that's not true. It's your body, it's your right. There's, you don't marry off and then with that comes the ownership of your body. Thank you.
Grace has become a hard act to follow.
No, so that's quite brilliant, Grace. Powerful.
I'm angry.
I think
Powerful.
before, and actually, it is relevant to Surah Al-Humazah, inshallah, which we will concentrate on today. But we notice that all the early revelations, and I'll elaborate upon this in a second, all the early revelation of the Quran focused on building virtues, moral values. If we think of the period after migration, where the Prophet ﷺ with his companions and family from Mecca to Medina, Medina was the period of practical ethics.
Sorry.
That sounded like me.
Yeah, I was listening on the way.
Catching up the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Medina was a period of practical ethics. The actual dispersion of the faith within the context of numerous historical contingencies. So, in many ways, the period of the Prophet ﷺ was his family and his companions. After the migration to Medina is a period in which the Quran unfolds, addressing a very nuanced set of historical contingencies. But what precedes Medina, the revelation of the Quran in Mecca, is exclusively dedicated to building the moral structure of the human being, what type of values, what type of virtues are necessary. And for us as Muslims, we can't separate the two. In the same way that we must extract moral lessons from the way that the early community negotiated various historical challenges in Medina, we must understand that everything that comes in Medina is built upon a foundation of virtues that were anchored in the Mecca period. And this is why the first decade of the revelation of the Quran is solely dedicated to building the structure of the moral human being. Now, in many ways, and Allah tells us this outright eventually, that you cannot bear witness unless you have attained an understanding of justice. And your function, if as a Muslim you do not bear witness, if as a Muslim you are existing in a hedonistic way, absorbed by your articles of consumption, and your existence doesn't bear witness to moral values summed up in the basic concept of justice, then in fact you're not a Muslim. You are a Muslim by name, by identity, but you are not a Muslim by substance and by doctrine. You are not someone who is among the muqarrabun, or those who are close to Allah, close to the divine. So when Allah tells us, what ultimately does Allah bestow upon those who understand and internalize the moral virtues and the obligation of bearing witness, that Allah bestows upon them light, nur. Allah gives them light, nur. And your existence on this earth must be a longing for the attainment of this light. Now this light doesn't come through a sense of self-righteousness, and it doesn't come through arrogance, and it doesn't come through heedlessness or banality. It comes through a very conscious process of engagement, and as Grace was saying, sacrifice. You work hard at it. And as an act of grace, if you are diligent in your obligation of witnessing for justice on behalf of God, even if it's against yourself and your loved ones, the act of grace is that you attain this light. Now, before going to Surah Al-Humazah, as I've told you before, Grace and I don't coordinate what we're talking about, what we'll talk about, but we intentionally do it that way. A couple of things. One of the things that, alhamdulillah, that was very heartwarming is that when we were traveling in Boston, both at Harvard and Wellesley, people would come up to us and they would it was extremely heartwarming when you hear that people thank you for the halaqas. But by the way, there is a huge fan base for Grace that even as one fan put it, said, I hope your husband doesn't mind, but I look forward to your talks more than his, which is perfectly fine. But it's very heartwarming when people that you've never met that come and sincerely thank you for what they consider to be or what they for the voice, for the testimony, for the freshness of what they hear. One of the things that touched me greatly was a woman we met at Harvard. I don't remember her name now. Maybe I shouldn't even mention her name. But she's a convert, and just a woman with an enormous amount of light emitting from her. She's married to an Egyptian, and as she was talking to us, her tears were rolling down her eyes, and she was expressing how grateful she is, and then her tears rolled, and it was just very beautiful to see someone emit so much light. And to know that there are even as people as far as India that just sent us a message about a problem that is taking place in India that they want me to address, and so alhamdulillah, but it harkens back to something that Grace mentioned. Islam unfolded in the world, harkening back, or reminding people of an essential moral value and a set of virtues that have been consistently the message of the one God, one and only God, from time immemorial, from the time of Adam to the time of Ibrahim, all the way to the Prophet Muhammad and onwards. And Muslims forget, I'm not talking about imperial Islam, I'm not talking about the military, I'm not talking about the armies of Islam, I'm talking about the Muslims that spread Islam in West Africa and South Asia, and the numerous Sufi orders that unfolded upon the world, that not only expressed themselves through great acts of beauty, but even gifted to the world the origins of the violin and the guitar, the lute, and the tour de bourse, gifted to the world the origins of courtly poetry and courtly love, and the very idea of knighthood and virtues that had an enormous amount of influence on Renaissance Europe, and had an enormous amount of influence on the way that the world reclaimed the best of what humanity is, and that is the way that humanity can produce beauty, whether that beauty is expressed in art or music or paintings or poetry or literature. That is the Islam that made us a civilization of books, a civilization that produced more texts than any other competing civilization that has existed during the same span of time anywhere. But that is not the Islam that exists today. And the whole point, and I will go inshallah to my grave insisting on this, the Islam of pietistic affectations and ghetto consciousness and literal displays of power games is repugnant to Allah as the very act of injustice is. The Islam of ikrah, of compulsion and coercion and oppression has nothing to do with the true Islam. The Islam of patriarchy and suffering and misery and oppression has nothing to do with the truth. when I recess class to stand with sex survivors protesting the Kavanaugh nomination, what I didn't tell my class is that I did so as a Muslim. That if I was not a Muslim, all my colleagues didn't recess class. Because the dean, they got the message that the administration didn't want us to recess class. And whatever their moral system is, but my moral system, which is thoroughly informed and shaped by Islam, would force me to stand with the oppressed party, the party that is suffering, the party that has suffered an injustice, and compelled me to do so by testifying even against my own self-interest, because you don't go forward in life if you oppose your administration. But that is the only Islam that is worthy of the name. Because in submitting to Allah, we submit to no one else. Now, let me tell you that as Muslims in the West, Grace is absolutely right. We don't talk about things like sexual abuse or drug addiction or alcoholism, and we even act arrogantly, as if we are immune, as if sexual abuse doesn't happen to our women, and it happens to those guys. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's complete nonsense. The difference is our women suffer sexual abuse by family members and by friends of the family, and they shut up about it. They are completely silent about it. But it is rampant. It is rampant in Muslim countries, and it's rampant among Muslim communities in the US and in England and in Australia and so on and so forth. And it is offensive to Allah that we don't stand by the side of the survivors of sexual abuse in the same way that we ought to stand by the side of anyone that suffers injustice, and say, as Muslims, we have no other option but to stand for your liberation and for your empowerment. Because in Islam, we don't stand with the powerful against the disempowered, we stand with the disempowered against the empowered. That's the Islam of al-Mustada'afin. That's the Islam of the Quran. That's the Islam of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, what traumatized me is to see some people in the current environment come in and say, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, a woman that complains of sexual abuse has to bring 4 witnesses. Otherwise, she should keep it to herself and shut up. That is the height of ignorance. That is the height of corrupting Allah's law. Allah, when and citing, of course, the Aisha incident where they take a law that was designed to protect the honor of women from slander and twist it to become a law that oppresses women who are sexually abused into silence. What type of understanding of maqasid al-Sharia is this? The purposes of Sharia. This is the difference between someone truly trained in Sharia and someone superficially trained in Sharia. Someone superficially trained in Sharia only deals with the surface formalities. That's even assuming good intentions. Assuming good intentions. But to tell Muslims, oh, well, Ford didn't bring 4 witnesses against Kavanaugh, so, we can't really support her, stand on the side. What are the implications for sexual abuse? Now, if your daughter was sexually abused, would you tell her bring 4 witnesses, otherwise shut up? What are we doing to Sharia? What are we doing to Islam? And this is someone who's very well established in the Muslim community and a teacher of generations. I mean, all types of kids go in Zaytun. Astaghfirullah Ali al-Azim. May Allah protect us from ignorance and injustice and ugliness. People, we are destroying our Islam. We are destroying our faith. If we don't at Jum'ah stand and declare that we Muslims stand with the disempowered and the sufferers of injustice, then what value do we bring to this world? What value? Our beards? Our hijabs? That's the world, what the world needs? More men with beards and more women with hijabs? Astaghfirullah al-Azim. Allah is with us in everything. And when we take Allah's religion, what we believe, Allah's only true message, the message confirming the messages before it, and affirming the message from the time of Adam to Ibrahim to Isa to Musa, Jesus and Moses, to all the way to Muhammad. And we associate Allah with ugly and stupid positions, stupidity. You don't think that's blasphemy? You don't think we're committing an offense against Allah? How can we come to women that suffer abuse in the midst of night? In the case of Muslim women, it's usually someone sneaking into her bedroom at night, not sexually abusing her while she's intoxicated. And then we come to this woman that suffered a violation that is unspeakable and say, do you have 4 witnesses? That's what you think Allah intended by the law of slander? That's what Allah wanted to teach us by the law of zina? Shame on you. Shame on you. Of course, I'm responding to a very well-known fatwa that was issued. But what do you say? I mean, what do you say when you find Muslims standing, protecting the aggressor, and standing with injustice against justice? And I don't want to, what gets to me is that it has become common for Muslim mullahs and imams to work to give immunity to the most disgusting type of abusers of power in the world. In Egypt, 75 people are sentenced to death in one day. Egypt, with all its shuyukhs from Azhar, gave immunity to a massacre that was committed, that was described by human rights organizations as one of the worst massacres in an urban center in the modern age, in the midst of Rabah. The imams of Saudi Arabia give immunity to horrendous, egregious human rights abuses in Yemen, and the imams of the United Arab Emirates do the same. And then the imams of the United States give immunity to sexual abusers. And I can tell you that the imam, because I'm just reviewing a manuscript now on crimes of sexual abuse in the Saudi legal system against minors. We're reviewing it for publication. It was a PhD dissertation. And I can tell you what reeks through it is the amount of immunity that men of power, of so-called religiosity, the mullahs and imams, give to protect sexual abusers throughout a place like Saudi Arabia, which, I mean, we sum it up in the word human trafficking. Islam without virtues and morality is not even worth holding on to. The only reason that I comment on the Quran is because the Quran teaches virtues and morality. The day that I believe that the Quran is no longer relevant to virtues and morality is the day that I would abandon it in an instant. And every human being must have that consciousness. It actually, as much as I'm flattered by it, but it hurts me when I go around and people come up to me, or people write us emails all the time, or they send things to Scholar of the House or so on, and say, I want to thank you because you saved my faith in Islam. I was going through a crisis. It hurts me because I know exactly what they're talking about. They get sick of the ugliness, of the stupidity and nonsense and the ignorance. Now, look at the beauty of the basic moral lessons that Allah instills in us through the early revelation of the Quran. Surah Al-Humazah is one of the early surahs in the Quran that draws a picture. It draws a moral picture. You know, I don't have an English Quran with me.
Number 4.
Okay. وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ. The literal translation, straightforward enough, woe to every fault-finding backbiter. The translation is reasonable. Every fault-finding
We'll read it. So,
backbiter. While let's skip over the origins of why while connotes what it connotes, but while is used in Quranic Arabic and pre-Quranic Arabic to always it expressed both shock and moral condemnation. Now, often it also connotes a promise of retribution or punishment. But when, even in Arabic usage, when you say Ya Wayli means, oh what shock has befallen me, oh what calamity has befallen me, oh what disaster has befallen me. In colloquial Arabic, it still survives Wayli. It has become, instead of Wayli, it has become Wayli. Whether it has passed from Andalusian Arabic to the Romantic languages is as the origins of woe, by the way, the English woe. Is something else because it's also in Syriac. The same word is used in Syriac and so on and so on. So while now this expression of shock and strong moral condemnation is to someone described a characteristic or a character flaw described as Al-Humazah and Al-Lumazah. Now we again pre-Quranic Arabic is extremely useful in placing meaning of words, and Al-Humazah man yahmizu nas, or the one that practices the act of hams. What's interesting is that you have a variety of discussions as to the meaning of these two precise words, Humazah and Lumazah, and what precisely they connote. But, so some said, for instance, that Al-Humazah is Al-Mukhtab, and Lumazah is Al-Ayyab, which I'll explain in a second, with some variations in the theme. But if I sum up the debate as to precisely what they describe, we could say that what they all conglomerate on, what they all unify around, is a moral type, a personality type. And the personality type is someone with an attitude problem. And the attitude problem is of haughtiness, and that haughtiness, that sort of sense of greater than thou, I'm more important, makes that person comfortable with finding faults in others, and consistently, because of that sense of entitlement, speaking about the way that other human beings are deficient in social company, and often in the absence of others. So some have said that Humazah is someone that speaks ill of people, and Lumazah is someone that gestures offensively to people. Nevertheless, the personality type is still the same. What it's getting at, it's still the same. It's an attitude of finding fault with others and consistently pointing out the faults of others. So, Al-Lammaz is a person that doesn't look inward, doesn't presume to think about the ways that you are internally deficient, but is constantly externally positioned. They always look at the way others have failed, not the way they have failed. That's the nature of Al-Hammaz al-Lammaz. Al-Humazah is a personality type. Now, there is a little nice marginality. Well, it's not marginal in the real sense, but in theology and philosophy, it's something that, so you see how seriously Muslims took the Quran and how extensively their discussions about the Quranic text were. So I brought with me Tafsir al-Maturidi. Of course, al-Maturidi is the eponym of a major school of theology that negotiated between the theologies of Ash'arism and Mu'tazilism. And al-Maturidiyya on very theological issues stood midway between the debates of the Mu'tazila and the debates of the Ash'ari. Well, Tafsir al-Maturidi has among the tafsir that records the interesting discussion that I'm going to tell you about now. Al-Maturidi noticed that, as well as others, because it's not original to Maturidi himself, but that expression, wail, is often used in the Quran to describe, it's as if saying woe or a promise of woe to people, to certain character flaws, moral character flaws. So, for instance, it will say, you know, why Al-Humazah or those who don't observe their prayers, or those who don't give to the poor, or so on. But the Quran doesn't say وَيْلْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ or woe to kuffar. Now, normally we, in our modern usage, we use the word kufr associated with the act of what? Infidels, right? In fact, someone like Bernard Lewis, emphasized that Muslims understand the entire world in terms of a paradigm of kufr versus iman, or infidels versus non-infidels. Now, I'm sure that modern Muslims would be surprised that in theological discourse, when they thought about this, they said, well, the Quran says woe to descriptions of moral failures, that the moral failure is inherent in the term itself. So when you say Humazah and Lumazah, woe to those who are inflicted with that moral deficiency, it's because Humazah and Lumazah can never be a good moral characteristic. It is always a moral deficiency. That begs the question, well, can kufr be other than a moral deficiency? The answer, by a whole host of theologians, the answer is yes. Sometimes it is not a moral deficiency. And I'll read to you the text as to why. وَالْجَوَابُ عَنْهُ, I'm just going to read the Arabic and then expand it in English. وَالْجَوَابُ عَنْهُ أَنَّ الْإِيمَانِ لم يحسن لاسمه ولم يحسن لاسمه ولا قبح الكفر لنفس اسم الكفر، لأنه ليس أحد ممن يذهب مذهبا ويدين دينا إلا وهو يكفر بشيء ويؤمن بشيء، لأن المسلم مؤمن بالله تعالى كافر بالطاغوت، والكافر يكفر بالرحمن ويؤمن بالطاغوت ويعبده. فثبت أن الإيمان ليس يحسن لنفس اسم الإيمان ولا قبح الكفر لعين اسم الكفر، ولكن الإيمان إنما حسن من حيث أنه أوجبت الحكمة الإيمان به، وقبح الكفر لأن الحكمة أوجبت ترك الكفر. فالإيمان حسن لما فيه من المعنى، والكفر قبح لما فيه من المعنى، لما فيه من معنى الكفر. وهذان الفعلان قبيحان في أنفسهما، أي الهمزة واللمزة، لا بغيرهما. فكان التعيير الذي يقع بهذين الفعلين أكثر وأبلغ منه في تعييرهم بالكفر. So what is he saying? There are, being kafir is a relative term, because any person who's a kafir means, a kafir just means that you are ungrateful, or you refuse to acknowledge your gratitude or your belief in something. So he's saying, well, that word, by its essence, kafir and mu'min, are relative in nature. You believe in something and you are a kafir in something. If you're a Muslim, you believe in Allah and you are kafir towards taghut or oppression. Taghut is literally oppression. And it is very interesting that Muslims thought that the antithesis to Allah is taghut. The exact opposite of Allah is oppression, which again, it's a state, it's a paradigm shift that modern Muslims need very badly. Now, someone who's not a Muslim, someone who's an atheist or whatnot, believes in whatever they believe in, and they are a kafir vis-a-vis Allah. So you cannot say woe to a kafir, because by its nature the word kufr is relative. You believe in something and you disbelieve in something else. Unlike when you address words that describe moral lack or moral failures or non-virtues or moral faults. There you can say woe to the moral act itself or the moral failure itself. Meaning what? Meaning that the condemnation is whether you have a belief or not. So in those, the Bernard Lewises who told us, and unfortunately influenced the way Muslims think, a lot of Muslims think, that Muslims don't have a universal sense of virtue and morality. They're absolutely wrong. Al-Humazah and Lumazah, whether from a Muslim perspective or a non-Muslim perspective, is a moral failure. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you get the point? So what he's saying is that Allah condemns and will punish a Humazah and Lumazah, whether that person is a Muslim or non-Muslim. Because as a human being, you must be aware of that as a moral fault, regardless of your Iman status. Regardless of whether you are a Muslim or a non-Muslim, atheist or non-atheist, whatever your belief is. Now, of course, the same text that I've read, if it was written by modern Muslims, you'd have Muslims having epileptic fits. Modern Muslims, what do you mean kufr sometimes is not bad? How could you say Iman is a relative term? That's the difference between people who think seriously, engage the text seriously, and people who work from a knee-jerk apologetics, defensive positions that are not analytically rigorous. So moral failures are moral failures regardless of faith, and regardless of religion, and regardless of cultures. While belief and lack of belief is something that we look at from the point of view of the believer or non-believer. Now, another thing that is pointed out now, why does Allah condemn the Humazah and Lumazah so unequivocally? Remember, we're building the character of Muslims who are going to spread Islam in the world. So if I'm talking to Muslims in the US, I'm saying this is the Islam that is going to build you as a human being in order for you to represent Islam effectively in a land that doesn't know Islam. And if you don't have that Islam, then you're a waste of space as a Muslim, right? You might as well be anything else. I don't care what you are. As far as I'm concerned, it's not. You don't represent the Islamic moral impulse. Now, why does one of the things that I've read about this that just fascinated me always is, and I'll read it in Arabic first. Because I looked for it last night until I found it. لئلا يمتنع أحد عن الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر لما يخشى أن يسخر به أو يستهزأ. So, the nature of those people who are constantly talking about others and pointing the finger at them for their moral failures is that they have a chilling effect on people who want to stand up for justice and truth, that if you don't condemn that moral failure, those who are constantly pointing the finger, the chilling effect will mean that those who wish to enjoin the good and forbid the bad, al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar, will fail to do so because they fear being mocked and fear being put down. I mean, think about that. It's a remarkable insight that if you have a society, as we actually do, in which we have people in the habit of looking externally, not internally, people in the habit of mocking others, the chilling effect will be that you teach your society that it is better to shut up and avoid the limelights. Because if you stand for a principle, you will be mocked. You will confront the Humazah. Let's save questions till the end, when we're done with the surah, because I don't want to interrupt the flow. You will be mocked, and the Humazah will affect you. So I mean, I'll also, among the things that I'll read, إذا العقلاء يمتنعون عن الأفعال القبيحة فعلى هذا الوجه. He's talking about how by nature that people, that Al-Humazah is a فعل قبح, is an act of ugliness, and by nature of morality, that people, whether you are a mu'min or a kafir, you would know that this is a moral failure and that an act of ugliness. Now, as I said, the Quran is drawing a picture. It's a personality type. Who are those people that jeer and mock and talk about others and have a chilling effect on society? What personality types are they? And that comes in the verses that follows. So, second verse, الذي جمع مالا وعدده.
Who amasses riches, counting them over.
So, first thing, I should tell you, so just so anyway, there is a difference in قراءات on جمع مالا وعدده, but I don't want to get into the قراءات because it doesn't make a difference in the meaning. So, who are these people? Are they the disempowered in society or the empowered? The empowered. You're not talking about some marginal figure in society that is in the bad habit of engaging in trivia. You're talking about people who are powerful, and because they're powerful, they are imbued with what? Arrogance, right? And that arrogance inflicted them with a moral flaw, a universal moral flaw, non-relative, not contingent on belief or disbelief, that they are constantly snubbing their nose as they look at others and say, look at them. That's why you have the chilling effect. Now, the image here drawn by the Quran is quite powerful. جمع مالا, collected wealth. But وَعَدَّدَ, what does, and counted it. Literally, and counted it. But when they said وَعَدَّدَ, why does it need that emphasis? Why does it say جَمَعَ مَالًا, collected wealth? We get the point. You're amassing wealth. But why does it add, why does Allah add وَعَدَّدَ and counted it?
Drawing an image of stinginess, just like holding on to it.
Your addiction to money has become such that you love to sit there and look at your portfolio, in our modern terms. In their old terms, when you read the tafsir, they say, you sit there and you love to look at your deeds and your cattle and your sheep and your goats and your acres and so on. In our modern terms, you love to look at your portfolio. Your entire life is your portfolio. How many stocks do I have? How many, I don't know what I have. Whatever rich people would love to count, right? You sit there and you're with your accountant and your lawyer and, how am I doing now? And this has become your life. And at the same time, your attitude towards society is not a giving one. It's a snub-nosed, arrogant one. Where you're constantly looking at people and saying, what's their problem? They can't get kidney dialysis. They can't pay for their medical costs. They can't pay for their school. What? They're lazy. They're stupid. They're arrogant. They're ignorant. It's a personality type. Now, what is amazing for our age is the verse that even follows. يَحْسَبُ أَنَّ مَالَهُ أَخْلَدَهُ. Now that's irony and sarcasm in the Quran, by the way. You can write a whole dissertation about sarcasm in the Quran. There have been books written in Arabic about it. Now, what's the translation?
Thinking they will make him live forever.
Yeah. This is the nature of the addiction of money. The more addicted you are to your portfolio, the less you think of death. And the more you don't want to think of death. And when it gets to extreme cases, you even do, as some modern people do, you preserve your head or body in, what do you call this? Cryogenics. You preserve your body. It's now the intoxications, the addictions of money, which is, by the way, a very powerful addiction. No less powerful than drugs and alcohol. Absolutely. In fact, far more dangerous than drugs and alcohol and sex. Money is the true modern shirk, partners to God. It's no longer we don't need to destroy statutes and what do you call them? Idols. In the modern age, because that's not what more people worship anymore. Idols is something of the past. That was something that people cared about in the past. They actually would. But today, the idols of today is money, portfolio, stocks, Wall Street, fancy cars, expensive homes, whatever the signs of prestige are. Now, again, remember, the Quran is building the moral character of the Muslims that will unfold upon the world. If the moral project of the Quran fails, the early Muslims will fail. If it succeeds, if it creates an Abu Bakr and Umar and Ali and Uthman, if it creates these great human moral beacons of morality, then the project succeeds. And when you read the Quran, read it with an eye towards what is it telling me about my moral character. It is drawing, Surah Al-Humazah is drawing this powerful picture for you of a personality type, a personality that is addicted, a personality that is arrogant, a personality that is haughty, a personality that finds faults in others but doesn't look inward, and a personality that is so addicted to money that it avoids the thought of death, even with what is a psychotic belief that somehow this money, or even as one Shanqiti says in his tafsir, that there are among the rich that even if they accept the inevitability of their death, they will dedicate their money to the eternity of their name. So perhaps you've accepted you're going to die, maybe you found out you have terminal cancer or something, but still you want your name to live forever. If that, you want it to live forever as a bestower of good deeds, that's one thing. But if you want it to live forever through hogging up the money and monopolizing the money, that wealth, it's a fatal moral character flaw in society itself. Okay, now, as often the practice of the Quran, when it says woe, wail, it tells you, Quran acts on the dynamic of just recompense. That you receive the warning, you will also be told what will happen for you, happen to you, for the moral failure to heed the warning. And you can press your luck if you're among those people by saying, well, God will forgive me, or I don't believe in God, or whatever it is. But you've been given fair warning. What the consequences of what will happen to you in the hereafter. And most of the time, well, nearly, I think all the time actually, when the Quran says wail, the consequences come in the hereafter, not in the here now. Again, Jilani has a little latifa or nubza, where he says that's because of the nature of the word wail itself, and that it invokes the non-material and non-physical, but that's a higher plane of spirituality, in the very tonality of the wording of the Quran, because the Quran is music, and the words produce a feeling very much like musical keys and modulations in musical keys. And there are modulations in the music of the Quran that resonate inside of you. And so, and the ones who excelled in writing about this are the Sufis. The Wahhabis know nothing about music, and nothing about tonality, and nothing about modulation. Absolutely zero. The Sufis went to great insights in this. And when you read the way they analyzed the music of the word wail, which, by the way, in modern songs, I don't know if you ever hear modern Middle Eastern songs, you keep hearing waily, waily, waily. That proves that they were right centuries ago, right? Centuries ago, they were absolutely right. That word has a music and has a modulation that produces a psychological effect. They say that when you teach the music of the Quran, you must do it with dhikr and worship. So in other words, you teach it to people that you worship and do dhikr with. Your tradition, our tradition, is so rich and so nuanced and so moral and ethical and so endless, exactly like the cover of Reasoning with God, the ocean, just without boundaries. Okay. So what is their consequence? What is going to happen to these personality types?
Oh, you want me to read it first? Okay. No, indeed, he will be thrust into the crusher.
Okay. And read the verse that follows.
What will explain to you what the crusher is? It is God's fire made to blaze, which rises over people's hearts.
Okay. It is fires, God's fire made. Read that last one again.
It's God's fire made to blaze.
Okay. كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدراك ما الحطمة نار الله الموقدة. Okay. Okay, so what will happen to them? They will be cast in al-hutama. Now al-hutama is a fascinating word. Because, as has been pointed by the author of Lisan al-Arab, Ibn Manzur, the word hutama was not used to connote hellfire in pre-Quranic poetry. In Arabic usage, before the Quran, it didn't describe hellfire. The first time that there's an allusion to what we think is hellfire, or what we understand as hellfire, as al-hutama, occurs in the Quran. And so, commentators on the Quran paused at, we know that the root of the word is hattama, and the act is hitama. Hitama is anything that is a breaker of other things. So, hattama shay means to break something, to destroy something. So we say تحطمت الطائرة means that the plane has crashed. Or تحطمت السيارة, the car has been destroyed. It usually connotes something that breaks something up, a destroyer, a destruction. So it's an extreme form, because it is not just agony or punishment or suffering or relative damage. No, it is a complete destruction. And the description, and the Quran, typical of Quranic style, whenever it uses a term that is not known to Arabs in a certain sense, it will follow it with, and how do you want to know what it is? So, كَلَّا لَيُنْبَذَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمَةِ, no, verily God promises that they will be cast in the hutama, and then God follows this with, and do you know what the hutama is? Again, it's what do you call that question?
Rhetorical.
Rhetorical question. But at the same time, it's not entirely rhetorical, because you could readily say, well, wait a minute, what is al-hutma? Right? Now, there has been very interesting things written because of the hadith tradition, which the problem is hadith gives you a little bit of commentary on what, or elaborations upon what something like hutama is. But many of the narrations of hadith that comes to hellfire are not very reliable. And so we tend to search hadith that by themselves, each of them, standing alone, is not reliable, but when you accumulate a whole bunch of them together, then you say we have cumulative individual narrations that seem to indicate such and such. We weigh the tarjih, we weigh the probability of meaning in one way or the other. But the reason I mentioned that is that you'll find, so I mean, just to give you a practical example. So, the hutama in Tafsir al-Mawardi has 5 different meanings. Now, but they're all close. And the thing we all understand that it is here punishment in the hereafter. That we can all agree on. Now, I have read in a Sufi text, and I was trying to think which Sufi text I read it in, that al-hutama can precede the hereafter. In other words, that a society that doesn't restrain the powerful elite, that find faults in others, and that chill in joining the good and forbidding the evil, that society will meet, al-hutma means it will meet destruction on this earth before the hereafter. But I couldn't remember which text I read it in, so I decided to not go into that. I like to reread the text so I'm not saying things that I'm not absolutely sure of. It makes sense because, I mean, just look around you. If there is no way to constrain the power of the elite and to force them to account for their faults, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then the elite find faults in everyone else but themselves. I mean, listen to Trump speaking. And Trump actually says, I don't know if I would ever, in one of his speeches, he said, I don't know if I would ever confess that I made a mistake. And he says it's a Freudian slip. I mean, it's true. When you are in the company of that level of power, it's very difficult to look inwards. I've known enough rich people in Egypt especially, and I can tell you the arrogance of the real wealthy Egyptians, I mean the billionaires, who are in bed with the military, it's amazing. I mean, just the way they look at the world, and because they're very powerful and very rich, whatever they say or do is automatically correct. Well, the response to that arrogance is thoroughly demoralizing and deconstructive reality in the hereafter. The hutama is something that will unravel the human ego apart. Hellfire is a crusher of egos, as Jilani says. The first thing that will be destroyed, that you will have to account for in the hereafter, for every moment of arrogant injustice you inflicted on others, you will be confronted with, and you will undergo the diminutive state of having that arrogance turned back onto you and thoroughly break you down. And although, of course, bookish people don't like to confront that reality, but even if your arrogance was books and knowledge, if you used it to commit injustice against others, that will be turned onto you. As you read in Al-Humazah by Hamid al-Ghazali, he says, every moment in which you thought you are superior to people because of your texts, and you ignored the rights of other human beings because of your texts, even your books will testify against you and thoroughly crush that ego. The nature of al-hutama. Now, hellfire, we call it hellfire. And we know fire as excited energy. What is the true nature of fire? Can anyone tell me what is the true nature of fire?
Energy being destructive.
It's energy that makes cells break away the bonds of gravity on this world, right? But is it something that has a material existence like wood or metal or water? No. It's an energy. It's a pure form of energy. So hellfire in the hereafter, is it going to be flames the way that Catholicism imagined it in the medieval age? We don't know. We know that it is going to be thoroughly deconstructive of what the forms of injustice were and sin were in this world. So when Allah says then that hutama, what do you know? Do you know what the hutama is? And the answer rhetorically is, well, tell me. Narullah al-muqada, the God's fire, and you read very fascinating things in the tafsir about nar. What is the? I mean, because that was a philosophical question even before Islam. You know, before Islam, there was these discussions about the four elements of nature, right? Water, fire, wind, and earth. The four elements, and in Aristotelian logic, there were these extensive discussions about the four elements and their natures. So even among Greek logicians, and when Muslims inherited Greek logic, they carried on the discussions about the four natures of existence. But they paused before two particular elements that Muslims thought have huge implications for theodicy. Water, because God says that everything living comes from water, and they said, so does water have the secret of existence? And fire, because fire is so material to creation in the case of jinn, not in the case of human beings, and because it is the nature of punishment. So you read in commentaries on Aristophanes and other Greek logicians by Muslim scholars some really fascinating things on fire. And the obsession of Muslim scholars was fire in the hereafter. Now, التي تطلع على أفئدة. Can you read the translation?
For ayah 6 or 7.
We'll do both.
It is God's fire made to blaze, which rises over people's hearts.
Okay. Now, الذي تطلع على الأفئدة, which rises above people's hearts, is not a literal translation. It's a translation based upon a choice in interpretation. Because التي تطلع على الأفئدة means literally that حطمة, God's blazing fire, التي تطلع على الأفئدة, that will تطلع, what's تطلع mean?
Mouth?
Penetrate, will look through, will literally penetrate through. And afida is hearts. So this caused commentators another pause, and a wonderful pause. Is the nature of punishment in the hereafter? It's as if every evil that is in your heart will spill out and you will be confronted with it. And that's going to be your hellfire. Because having to confront all the blackness that you live an entire lifetime suppressing in your heart and hiding is scary. It's terrifying. Every moment of arrogance, every moment of aggression against the rights of others and injustice and suffering you inflicted of others, you will confront its true nature. And this terrified particularly the Sufis. They, in one of the very famous Sufi poem by Al-Mistaghanimi, an Iraqi Sufi from the 14th century, he says, and I don't remember the exact Arabic verses, so I'm just going to sum up the translation. If Allah gave me a choice, I would choose a fire that burns my flesh, for at least when the flesh is burned, the pain would cease. Because if your skin burns off, then you don't feel pain anymore. You feel pain because it's a skin burning. But if it is the hauntings of the evils of the heart, how can that ever stop, and where can I ever run away from that? Now, of course, the Wahhabis have no use for, they completely discard the notion that it's suffering to confront the blackness of your heart. The Wahhabis have some really bizarre, dismissive things to say about that. God will not confront us with anything that is in our heart. God will just burn us, like shish kebab, God will make shish kebab out of us, but what was inside is inside. It's such a... Now, penetrating. Now, the penetration, is it of a spiritual nature or a physical nature? Meaning, is God saying that, if you remember, the first layer of meaning, as our methodology always maintains, first layer of meaning is a fire that will burn off the flesh and do so, and as the Quran tells us, every time the flesh burns elsewhere, then the fire reaches the organs, and then God recreates the flesh again, so you will repeat the cycle of punishment again. And that's the first layer of meaning. What the second layer of meaning is that, fire could mean the fire as we know it on earth, or it could mean some type of tortuous energy that we cannot conceive of on this earth because we have not experienced it. But what we do know is that that tortuous energy, that form of punishment, will expose an arrogant soul naked, will dismantle, deconstruct everything that made it into an unjust and arrogant and haughty soul. Okay. Now, in building that moral character, if you read enough of the stories of the companions and the family of the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, the thing that strikes you immediately is that they took the consequences of the hereafter as seriously as they take any physical manifestation that exists. So when God promises a severe punishment to those that exist addicted to their money, counting their money, amassing their money, and then using that money as a source of arrogance to look down on people and to focus on the moral failures of people but not their own, and God promises them a horrible fate, that God is not joking. And that is, you can count on that. That is a big difference between a secular outlook and a religious outlook. A secular outlook believes that morality can be anchored in a people through belief in social conventions or social covenants without the promise of reward or punishment in another world. While religious-based virtue believes that reward and punishment is part of the equation of justice and morality and necessary for a coherent belief in morality or a coherent understanding in morality and virtue in the first place. That it would be, put it differently, that it would be unjust to have virtues that will neither be rewarded or punishment, or punished. And that is a big difference. So when I find Muslims ignoring the otherworldly part, talking about virtue and morality as if it's a purely secular matter, I say, well, you've undermined the very purpose of religion. Because religion, the big point of demarcation between secular virtues and ethics and non-secular virtues or ethics is this insistence on whether reward and punishment is necessary for the very coherence of the concept of justice itself. And in the religious outlook, justice doesn't cohere as a philosophical concept if it's not either punished or rewarded ultimately and through something other than just simply karma. Unless karma has a divine engineer behind it, then you just get the punishment or reward on this earth rather than the hereafter, which is philosophically possible. Although it poses certain other issues. But anyway. Okay, so that's Surah Al-Humazah. So now we can take questions. First we're going to do questions related.
There's one more ayah.
Oh, what did I forget? Oh, الذي تطلع. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. إنها عليهم صدى في عمد ممددة. Oh, I did forget. Yeah. Maybe it's because في عمد ممددة gives us another big pause and another layers of, so it's sort of like you okay. Go ahead. Read these last two verses.
Which rises over people's hearts. It closes in on them in towering columns.
Yeah. Now this, just by virtue of the translation. Can you read it again slowly?
Yeah. It closes in on them in towering columns.
التي تطلع. So at first التي تطلع على الفيلم. إنها عليهم صدى في عمد ممددة. Now, immediately when you hear the translation, just through our methodology so far, I am sure you pause and say, wow, okay, this is going to have some very juicy stuff behind it. Because the way we know fire, the way we know normal fire that ignite, it doesn't close upon anyone, and it doesn't have towering figures, towering columns rather. So إنها عليهم مؤصدة. Two main views. What is it referring to? إنها عليهم مؤصدة. المؤصدة is something that closes upon something else. In eloquent Arabic, if you say الباب المؤصد or الموصد, either is correct, means a door that's closed. But there is a subtle meaning to it. Something that is موصد or مؤصد is closed, but with the possibility that it will open. It's very. I mean, if you're a poet, you would get excited about that. If you're, you don't say أوسطت الباب. That would not be eloquent. But you could say الباب المؤصد. So إنها عليهم مؤصدة. What is it referring to? Is it referring to the fact that those in the state of punishment, in hellfire, what we normally call Jahannam, they're enclosed in there, locked in there, unable to escape. It's like when Dante said, abandon all hope. That has a long lineage, that the nature of punishment in the hereafter is the loss of hope. And we know that a lot of parts of the Quran emphasize that that sense of hopelessness that underscores the grimness of punishment. The second says No, it doesn't refer to hellfire itself, but refers to the fire itself. Do you understand the difference? It doesn't refer to Jahannam, but refers to Nar. Why is that? What's the significance of that disagreement? If it refers to Jahannam, then you're in hellfire and you're locked in there. That's understood. If it refers to fire, the nature of this fire, then musada here doesn't mean locked, but means adheres to something, something that adheres to something and you can't get rid of. So in other words, that, whatever that the nature of that fire is, that will, as if open up the truth of your heart and confronts you with your evils, with your arrogance and so on. You're not. It will as if attach to your heart, like like a drone that you can't run away from. The target, it's gonna be impossible to escape from. So Mu'tada here means, it's as if saying, I promise you, it is not something that you're even going to be able to avoid or negotiate with, or in somehow, all the lifetime that you spent building walls of arrogance that shield you from having to confront your own failures. Well, when you confront God in the hereafter, that's going to be a completely different ball game. And these walls are going to come down and there will be no escape. So that's إِنَّهَا عَلَيْهِمْ مُوصَلَةٌ. في عمد ممددة. Two main views. Although in Mawardi notes just 5 different positions, but upon reflection and study, the 5 positions are really reduce themselves to 2 main ones. في عمد ممددة. Again, the literal words were unusual for Arabic usage at the time of the Quranic revelation, but of fascinating connotations. Fi amad is something that has, fi amad al-mumaddada could literally means pillars up high, or fi amad al-mumaddada could mean something that receives constant reinforcements. So it's a constant flow that you can't turn off and you can't even reduce in intensity. So here the imagery of the Quran is very powerful, and as many commentators said, that these are not mutually exclusive meanings. One is what exactly pillars could mean, only God knows. And if you're smart, you don't want to find out. Because if the image of hellfire is something like the pictures that we see of the way the clouds are, you've seen these NASA images of the astronomical images where you see these huge pillars of matter in gaseous form. If it's something going to be like that, awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time, only God knows. Allahu Alam. But the second meaning is something that we can relate to, and that is this hutama, this crusher, this breaker of arrogance, breaker of deceptions and injustice, comes in a constant reinforced flow of energy that you cannot shut off and you cannot escape from, and you cannot even reduce in intensity. The emotional impact of surah like Al-Humazah is succinct moral message with powerful imagery that gets your attention, because going through the affairs of life, we rarely pause, right? And even if someone tries to come in and join the good and forbid the evil and say, you know, can I get your attention about you being unfair to this, or there are people who are homeless, or people who are starving, or there are victims of sexual assault, or sexual assault survivors, or, you know, can you please give us your time to get people's attention? The more powerful and the more rich and the more arrogant they are, is very hard. I mean, look at the way Congress dealt with Kavanaugh, right? You know, FBI investigation 1 week and that's it. We're not going to wait. We're not going to pause. The style of the Quran is to get your attention by telling you the consequences. And saying, you know, there are going to be consequences. And these consequences are going to be very dire. And if you ignore it at your own peril. And my critical point is that the early Muslims, and by the way, not just early Muslims, but every Muslims that have created a moral project, from Hamid al-Ghazali in his Ihya Ulumuddin to the writings of someone like al-Asfahani or al-Subki or Raghib al-Asfahani or Ibn Miskawayh or Ibn Aqil, every moral visionist in the Islamic tradition paused and took seriously that powerful melodic message of the Quran. In other words, they all of them, everyone that I know of, go through a period where they say, you know, we need to contribute something to this world to make it better, because the trajectory we're going on right now is taking us to nowhere but hellfire. And as a result, they generate what we then know and study centuries later as a philosophical paradigm of virtue, an attempt to understand virtue and teach it to people. When we ignore this and we become simply literal readers of the Quran, in other words, turn the Quran into a mechanism for pietistic affectations and talks about not practical morality, not social standards, not social virtues, but simply these generalized messages, and in fact often avoid telling people what the consequences of moral failures will be, because it's not fashionable to talk about hellfire and to tell people that there will be punishment, and we don't want to alienate people. And as I'm often reminded, you know, when you give Jummah, don't talk about the negative stuff. You know, people have hard lives and they don't want to, you know, they don't want the downers. That's a fundamental moral failure. Because in the same way that God promises us ecstasies in moral achievement, but the warnings of moral failures and the consequences of moral failures are every bit as serious and as real. Okay, now we're finished with Surah Al-Humazah.
We've been going for 2 hours.
2 hours?
Yeah, so take a break pre-Maghrib. It's Maghrib now.
Oh.
And then do question and answer.
Okay.
Okay.